London, 206.
The beat goes on.
Echoes.
Well, I'm gonna get me some rocking shoes, and I'm gonna rock away all the blues. I'm a rocking day.
Sonny Fisher, Rockin' Daddy, the first single. Sonny, welcome to England. And let me say, first of all, how are you enjoying yourself? You finding it fun here?
I love it. I love the people. They've been so nice and kind and recepting me the way they have, and I'm just thrilled to death. I hadn't got over it yet.
That single issued almost 25 years ago, a long time, but what if somebody had said to you in 1956, you're going to hang on for a couple of decades and all of a sudden your music will be viable again and appreciated by a whole new bunch of kids?
I wouldn't have believed that at all.
But that's virtually what's happened. Here you are in England playing the music that you helped to create in the 50s, and it's been accepted in no uncertain terms. What's your impressions?
I just want to keep going with it. I'm going to go with it now. I'm going to try to keep going with rock and roll because I love it.
Okay, let's backtrack to the days of that record. That was the first one, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the first one.
Had you attempted to put anything on record prior to that?
No, I turned down the contract, which I probably shouldn't have done back then, but I haven't done anything since.
And how did it virtually come about? How did you approach Starday, or was somebody on a talent sort of scouting?
No, I just was playing a little nightclub, me and my little band, and after Presley come out that That's All Right Mama, well, I thought I wanted to do something, so we just run over and I scribbled down a couple little songs. We went in there and recorded them.
But this is pretty fast stuff, because That's All Right was only out maybe a year before you started to cut some action yourself.
Not that long, I don't think.
Not even that long, okay.
But that was the number 2 rock and roll song out.
Yeah. How had you heard That's All Right? Was it on jukeboxes in bars and things?
Heard it on radio station, a colored station first. KY,
On a colored
I think it was KYOK or some station in Houston.
Yeah.
And I thought it was a colored boy singing it.
Was that the sort of station you would listen to as a young kid? Or?
Back in those days?
Yeah.
Rhythm and blues and stuff like that mostly. You know, they had rhythm and blues station, country, western, old country, hillbilly station more or less back then. And those two was about it. That's all I ever listened to. Pop, they had pop, you know, but it wasn't doing nothing at that time.
So you were virtually a hillbilly act until that thing arrived?
Yeah, I was a hillbilly singer. I started off singing hillbilly, hollering Hank Thompson and Webb Pierce, people like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we come to some of the hillbilly stuff within your framework in a minute, but let's go back even beyond there. How had you actually got into music in the first place? Was it a family thing, or were you approached at school?
Yeah, my father had an old beat-up guitar that he kept hanging around the house, and I kept trying to pick on it and learn how to play it a little bit, and I never did learn how real good. I still don't know how too good, but I sat out there and hum songs with it and pick, and you know, I liked it, and I kept on fooling with it, and finally got where I could keep beating a little timing and stuff, and that's when I got interested in it. Then I started playing in the little nightclubs, you know.
Mm-hmm. How old would you be about that time?
I imagine about 18 when I first started playing in clubs and stuff.
And where did you find guys to put a band together?
Around different clubs, nightclubs and stuff in Houston. They're always coming around visiting each other. You know, these guys come in and sit in with you back then, you know, and they'd let you sit in, and you meet all kinds of musicians that way then.
The guys on the Starday tracks are of a fairly high standard, to say the least. Was the quality of musicians around your town at the time, was it a fairly high standard you could choose from? If you said, I wanted this guy on guitar or this guy on bass, you would really get the top people?
Yeah, you could have got the top people there if you could afford it. But me, I couldn't afford it at the time, so I just took my little old band and went in there and used them. And we wasn't, none of us the best. We were just trying to get into it.
So Rockin' Daddy came along, and what was the title of that second single?
A Sneaky Pete.
Sonny Fisher and the Rockin' Boys, to quote exactly what it says on the label from about 1956, and Sneaky Pete. How did that fare?
It did well. I don't know how many copies, but it did fairly well.
What were you doing for material at the time? I mean, these are all your own songs on the Starday album, but What sort of things were you doing in your act? Were you doing other songs by other artists?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of Jimmy Reed stuff back then, and country western.
Jimmy Reed?
Yeah, I did it all. I had bands with all different types in the later years after that, you know. I played for about 20 years after those recordings there, you know, in just big bands around Houston.
Right. And most of your work, I would imagine, at that time, did you do a lot of residences in clubs in Texas?
Yeah, that was mostly what you did back then. It was a sit-down job, more or less, you know. You'd stay there maybe 2 or 3 months in one club.
And what would they expect of you, 2.5 hours in a night or longer?
Well, I played most all night when I played at the club. I was the leader of the band, more or less, and I was there. I sang all night till 4 hours. I mean, about 4-hour gig. And I was too close to Presley's records, you know, and people thought I was trying to imitate him, but that's why I think I didn't do so good with those records then. Gene Vincent, Carl Perkins, all them come after that, you know, and it was all over, so everybody could do it. If I'd come back and ever recorded one again, it might have went, you know.
But isn't your neck of Texas fairly famous for helping Elvis to get off the ground at the time?
Oh, yeah, there and on up in Louisiana.
What actually happened? Can you remember the way it went about at the time, how Elvis sort of started to break in the Texas area?
Well, the first time he appeared there, I went to see him to see what it looked like and everything else, you know. I was always wondering. And he had his 3 pieces with him, Scotty and Bill and him, and they was up there shaking it, and there was about 20 people there. And so that's when my drummer sat in with him up there on the stage. And
where was this?
It's some Texas corral, I think, on Old Spanish Trail. And the drummer gave him a little lift, it seemed like, and it kind of got him going better, you know, and that's when he started carrying a drummer with him right shortly after that.
Because at that time Elvis had been doing the big shows like the Old Opry and Louisiana Hayride, where they wouldn't allow a drummer to be on stage.
Well, no, this before he ever went to the Hayride.
Yeah.
The first time I saw him. But, you know, after he hit the Hayride and everything, I think then later on he started using drummer and I don't know what else.
The reaction we're all told that happened at the time, like the real whirlwind he brought with him and the new tide and the change, was that as accurate as we're led to believe?
Oh, it was something that you couldn't believe till you see him. You know, I went back and seen him at the Coliseum after he, I think he probably was RCA then, and thousands and thousands of people screaming and cameras flashing. You can't imagine what it was, boy. And everybody was just chill bumps all over him, you know. I mean, he just had it. Right. It was, and that's, you know, I kept wanting to be like that, and 90% of the other teenagers probably did too, you know, and it was something to see.
And Starday were willing to cut you in that style. They weren't having to be talked into doing that type of thing. They were quite ready to do it, were they?
Yeah, when I went in there and they heard this little recording, you know, well, Jack Starnes and Pappy Daly wanted to put it out, you know. They thought it would do well, and supposedly it did do pretty well.
This is Rockin' Daddy
you're
talking about. Had you been doing that song on stage for a length of time in the act?
Yeah, I've done it every night over here. I didn't do it too much after the 50s over there in the States, so because it was mostly, it died out, you know. Rock and roll did for the last 10 or 15 years. It's not much rock and roll. It's disco and stuff like that now over there.
Is that the sort of thing you can hear in your hometown now in 1980?
Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, let's play another track from that period. It's, I think, the 3rd single, correct me if I'm wrong. It's called Rockin' and Rollin', Sonny Fisher.
Well, I love my baby and I love her fine. She gives me kisses and it feels so fine.
I imagine that was, as I say, the 3rd single. It was the 3rd single, right?
Yeah.
I imagine it was something you created as a follow-up to Rockin' Daddy. That wasn't one of the earlier songs you'd done. You'd written that, I presume, on the success of the rock and roll thing. Am I right?
Yeah. I wrote all that stuff on a rock and roll, you know, version.
Would Starday publish your songs at that time?
Yeah. Glad Music Company, they call it, published them.
Right. And you give everything over to them and they would handle the whole thing? Okay, well, let's talk about the band, if we may, because I mentioned that you culled together some of the best musicians in Houston or from the surrounding area of Houston. And the one that comes to mind is the lead guitar player, Joey Long, who's got quite a reputation. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about his history.
Joey is, he was originally from Louisiana, and we met him at there at Dudes, and he joined up with us, you know, and he liked rhythm and blues at the time, too, and he picked around on it and everything. That's why he's got the kind of bluesy, twangy guitar sounds in there, because he was still on rhythm and blues at the time we was playing together. And when we went in there, he put, that's what he could think of at the time to put in there, you know, on his part.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a nice band in Houston now. He's got more experience, just like I have, you know, back then, and he hadn't got much thought about them old records himself. He didn't think they was great neither, you know. His part of it, and
he could only be about 18 when he's playing.
Yeah, they was all about 18 or 19 years old, you know, just kids.
Let's be technical for a second and ask what was the instrument he'd be playing? Was it a Fender or a Gibson or something?
I think it was a Gibson. Then he had a Fender later. I think it was a Gibson.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it's a Les Paul or not. I don't remember.
Now, you know how equipment's changed these days. That we got enormous PAs and batteries.
Yeah, I've noticed.
Monitor
that.
speakers.
I've noticed that. It's all amazing to me, because I hadn't seen all this kind of equipment. It's like our stage equipment. I ain't seen nothing like that. And, boy, it's amazing. I just can't believe all that. We cut in a little studio yesterday. It was just a small studio, but they had all the equipment. You didn't need the big rooms, you know, and all that like they did back then. They had a big room with one mic and a little turntable, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
When I recorded Starday, it was small.
And stage shows. I was about to ask you, what would you have done for a PA in Houston, in Texas, in '56? What would that be? Would that be the house system or something?
Well, most of the time, playing a smaller place and stuff, you had to carry your own PAs around. But the bigger places, they had them set up already, you know.
When you were on tour, did you ever actually hit the road with a package of any sort, one of the big sort of 15 acts on a show type?
No, I never did. We just played across East Texas I took my little band, and we was in my drummer's Cadillac, and we hit them, made a few little radio shows and stuff like that, and played on a couple of them, and then went on to the club, you know, and performed that night and stuff. And we enjoyed it. We thought we was really something, but
well, one of the most interesting tracks you cut for the label, for Starday, is a thing called Little Red Wagon, which is more, I'm sure you'll agree, country than rockabilly, right?
Yeah. Well, George Jones helped me inspire that. He said, "You ought to do something that's got a little country in it, you know." And so I picked these words up from a conversation or something one time, and I just wrote it and got it together, and I went over and recorded it, and thought maybe it might be a gimmick or something there that they'd like, you know, and it did pretty well.